Hannah and Lindsay, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
It's very excited. I've spoken about Mercury 13 many times on this podcast, and now they have two very interesting new executive recruits. So would you like to introduce yourselves a little bit?
I joined Mercury to lead the strategy function here. So I lead on investments in corporate development across the group, having spent the majority of my career in and around the sports industry, training as a lawyer initially, and then going into the broadcasting space before doing some venture capital investing, which wound me up at Mercury 13.
Nice. And Lindsay?
Yes, lovely to meet you. So I have been with Mercury 13 only for about 2 months, but basically joined as our Chief Revenue Officer across the group. And my responsibility is really to work with our portfolio of clubs to basically build revenue streams, sponsorship, retail, ticketing, drive fan engagement, and our marketing agenda so we can build audience and then obviously monetize the audience once we've built it. My background is sport and entertainment for about 20 years. So I started in consulting with IMG, which is now 160/90 in New York. And then I went to the NFL league office where I did a variety of commercial and marketing roles, first in the States and then over here, and then went to an esports team out of Berlin called G2. And then most recently, prior to Mercury 13, I was with McLaren Racing, covering licensing and digital across their portfolio. So
that's really interesting. And so if someone doesn't know, Mercury 13 are investing in women's football teams. And both of you come from, in sports background, but a lot of different experiences. So if we stay with Lindsay, you mentioned McLaren, you're working in esports. So how do you think that these experiences, how can you use those experiences in your approach to drive revenue now in women's football?
Yeah, I think the exciting bit that I can bring into this space is certainly a level of knowledge from the NFL, arguably the most commercially viable sports league in the world, in terms of how they delineate rights for broadcast partners, sponsors, or consumer products partners, and taking a lot of that learning into this role. But equally, I guess, from esports, understanding how important the community and the fan is to the ultimate product, and trying to bring that sort of together with that learning from the NFL. And then finally with McLaren, that was a really brilliant sort of experience in terms of how does a McLaren Racing brand show up and build audience and then drive revenue across different teams. So McLaren Formula One, McLaren Racing had an IndyCar team, Formula E, Extreme E, and then an esports team while I was there. And I guess in a very similar way, as a multi-club owner within the women's football space, we're very much looking at, how do we build audience across all of our clubs as well as at the group level at Mercury 13, and then how do we create brand consistency across all of those clubs and across group, which is a challenge, and then how do you ultimately turn that into revenue return? So I actually think all of those different experiences sort of mashed together come to life very much in this role. And then you have the added layer, which I'm very passionate about, which is women's sport and specifically women's football. And for me, there's, a connection because it feels more personal since I am a woman, since I have a daughter. I really care about trying to grow the game and create real heroes for her. So there's almost a purpose-led aspect to it that I maybe didn't have as strong of in those previous positions.
Interesting. So Hannah, your background also, you have worked, as you mentioned, in law, sports governance, and now you will be in charge of the strategy. So how do you think that your background, has played in now in your approach to strategic leadership at Mercury 13?
I think I've kind of had a 360-degree view of the sports industry, and that's been rooted across various business foundations, principles that we carry through as we look to kind of our investment and operational approach across the business. So from the legal side, I've got the kind of core skill set and honed that in the analytics piece. It's like, what are we doing and why are we doing it? From the governance side, it's how do we put sound policies and procedures and processes in place to make sure we're making the right decisions in the right markets in which we operate, and indeed at the holdco level in which we as a group seek to drive value. And then in the investment space, it's how do we look at opportunities that can maximize our return on investment? So what are the pillars in the framework that drive the investment criteria in each market in which we seek to invest in, and how can we maximize the returns against our investment criteria and make sound decisions along the way?
So I mean, Mercury 13 has invested now in their first club, and I'm sure there are many more on the horizon that you're looking at. So when you will oversee acquisitions in Europe's top women's football market. So when you're looking at these teams, what are some criteria that you prioritize when identifying a potential club for investment?
I think there are kind of 4 core criteria that we look at in each market in which we seek to go. So the first big piece for us is, and very intrinsically linked to Lindsay's role as it relates to revenue growth, is how do we commercialize the assets in the markets in which we seek to enter? So the women's game at this juncture is nascent in its development as it relates to its commercial strategy and dedicated resource. So we look to find teams in the core markets that are ripe for commercialization, i.e. does it have the correct storytelling capabilities that are attractive to partners that we seek to approach? Does it have the right stadium and facilities that are attractive to fans? Can we develop a product as it relates to match day that is appealing to the fans that we seek to nurture and grow? The data is showing us that the women's audience is different to that of the men's game. So where can we find these uncovered gems that we can elevate and evolve a commercial strategy around to drive revenue growth in the long run? The next piece is deal dynamics. So across Europe, we're yet to see the valuation jump that you have seen in the NWSL. So I think it is well known that the NWSL is currently trading at 8 to 12x revenue multiples. We're not yet there in Europe. We believe we have a short window of time to exploit appealing revenue multiples as they remain low today. We think kind of single digits is what we're seeing in the market. So how can we find deals that we can underwrite such that we believe there will be a expansion in revenue multiple, but also a significant ability to drive revenue growth? The next piece, along with commercialization, is what's the fandom of these clubs? Like, what's the heritage? What's the history? What's the story? Is there an audience there that we can tap into that aligns with all of the work we've done around data and insights to who the women's game is appealing to? So that's a key piece. It's what's the demographic of the locations that we are looking at with clubs that might be of interest to us. It's who are those fans and how can we tell their stories and bring them a product that appeals to them. The last piece is we look at kind of league dynamics. It's very different in Europe, market by market. Leagues are maturing at different rates. They're applying a different lens to how they indeed commercialize. How is that league revenue flowing through to clubs? For us, it's vital that we enter markets where we can nurture the ecosystem that we play and operate in. And the quality of the league is vitally important to us. And then the last piece, and most importantly, is the football operations. So what do the clubs have in place today? We've made it no secret that, we seek and aspire to have league-defining clubs that are playing in the top divisions in the markets that we seek to operate in. So are the core football foundations there ahead of our investment that will enable us to play in the top divisions in these markets?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I know that Como Women was the first team that's in Italy. So they have that, the history and all of those aspects that you mentioned. So I guess you mentioned it's different from the US, but are you looking into like England or Spain or some other of the stronger football nations, or some in particular, or is it Europe at large?
I think, we've made it no secret that we are looking at kind of the core football markets in Europe on a sort of priority basis. As to where we play next, it's a piece that is real-time live in play at the moment. So I think, watch this space and hopefully you'll see some more activity on our side in terms of our acquisition play, but we are focused at the moment in top European football markets.
I look forward to follow that and see what's coming next. You mentioned a lot of commercialization, and of course that's Lindsay is something that you work a lot with in sponsorship and fan engagement. So you mentioned the opportunity to refine fan engagement in women's football. You mentioned that there were the fan base is a bit different from men's football maybe. So what are some initiatives, strategic initiatives that you think you can take to, level up the fan engagement?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because as Hannah was just saying, market by market, the women's football product varies slightly, and then equally market by market, the audience that already exists for women's football varies slightly. So I think when we try to look at fans more broadly, we really couple it into probably 3 big segments. So the first is existing women's football fans who we certainly want to continue to engage with and bring into our ecosystem. The second is, I call them future fans. So it is a group of people, maybe primarily women, who have felt a little bit like they don't belong in the football ecosystem more broadly. And so we're very much looking at different ways that we can engage that subset so that they feel very welcomed into, the biggest game in the world. So it's almost like bringing football to the other half of the world because it's mainly a men's game right now. And speaking from my experience, going to a lot of men's football matches over here in the UK for the past 10 years that I've lived here, I always felt a little bit out of place and suddenly discovered the women's game and felt really comfortable, more of a family-friendly atmosphere, want to take my own daughter, my husband. So it's just a really different experience that I think we can enact some really carefully curated tactics and strategies that speak to that female audience that maybe didn't feel super included in the men's game to date. And then I guess the last piece is more a Mercury 13 angle. And for us, I think a big differentiator is we've got this really authentic link into lifestyle and culture. So if you use what we've done at FC Como Women's as sort of a case study, it is a very luxurious, elegant brand that I don't think a lot of people expected. Nike is one of our partners there. Their only other partner in Italy is Inter Milan. We are an independent women's club in Italy. And so the fact that Nike came in with us as a founding partner, no less, to sort of make a statement of they're doing something different, we see the value in this trajectory, I think really speaks to not only what the business is doing in terms of elevating the women's game, but also that cultural lifestyle slant that we're very much looking to bring into all of the different clubs that we engage with and acquire. But actually, that's the Mercury 13 kind of overlay. And that is, I think, a really exciting thing to be developing as we expand in the market across Europe.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the women's football audience is expanding rapidly. And as you said, there is now with women's football growing that there is half of the population that's been left out now have, somewhere to go. So how in your role as CRO, how, can you see in order to maximize this opportunity now when the fandom for the sport is getting larger?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is if you everyone has different women in their lives. Women are all different. We all have different wants, but we're actually one of the most powerful consumer groups in the world. So if you look at where consumer spending is really concentrated, women really hold the purse strings, so to speak, across the globe. So then if we're looking at how does that translate into an experience in our stadiums, or how does that translate into an experience through digital and product and merchandise, I think there are different things we can deploy. So I'll give you a very real example. If you go to a men's game, there's a lot of pints and pies consumed, leading into the game and at halftime. Whereas at the women's game, it's maybe less pints, probably different types of drinks, probably want non-alcoholic options, especially if we're bringing our kids. So that just food and beverage offering at our stadiums needs to cater to more of that family-friendly audience. And then you can take that one step further in the retail offering. Right now, there's a lot of jerseys. Jerseys are amazing, right? That's the emblem of all of our clubs. It's hugely important as a relic and something that we will forever, cherish and put a lot of effort into the design of that along with our partners. But what are the other products that we can expand into to really appeal to women? Because I don't know a lot of women that love to wear jerseys unless they're at a game. So if I'm just walking around, on the street, going to work, going to pick up my daughter, going to the grocery store, whatever it is, I'm probably looking for a different level of product that speaks to me. And that'll be different for a lot of different subsets of women. So how do we then sort of channel that insight into a product strategy and product offering that appeals to a wide swath of women within that sort of those 3 target segments I spoke about? So those are just some examples of ways that we can enhance that experience for our fans that we're starting to put into place already.
Yeah, that's great and really interesting. And I mean, as we said, it is rapidly growing. And Hannah, if we're talking about like having the modern football ownership, and also because now in the women's football, so what does modern football ownership mean to you? And how do you think that it differs from maybe the more traditional model, if you call it like that?
It's a great question. I think, something that we are met with on a daily basis is this view that ownership of women's football teams in particular needs to be profitable from year one. So for us, given what we just said about the need to commit dedicated resource, this is a long-term investment play. So for us, this notion of modern football ownership is an acknowledgement that there will be a short to medium term period where we will need to invest and make losses, but there is a pathway in our mind to a clear trajectory to profitability. And for us, a key piece of modern day football ownership is ensuring that we are putting sound fiscal control in place across our portfolio that will enable our clubs to reach that pathway to profitability. And much of that is intertwined with what we're seeing in the market as it relates to wage inflation. I mean, I think the figures are around 30% year on year across Europe. And how do you therefore evolve player talent pathways to ensure that you're mitigating for costs that you can't necessarily underwrite given the finite of the talent pool in women's football today. But for us, it's a key piece of our strategy is ensuring that we are on the front foot of developing a talent pipeline to ensure that we can meet that pathway to profitability.
Is there a balance that you need to have there between keeping the authenticity of the sport and still, modernizing it? Is there a balance to play there?
In terms of
No, we say now it's more, football is an old sport and has its maybe, authenticity around it. And now we're modernizing it. Do you need to take that into consideration, or are we you're looking ahead, making it more modern?
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity to be had, much aligned to the product that you're offering on match day. It's how are our fans consuming this sport and this product? It's how are the media rights distribution models being looked at, reviewed? How are you potentially looking at the format of the competitions to bring the product to the next generation? We all can see the next generation. I'm a mother of 2 kids, and their attention spans are so short. If they are the next generation of fans, how are we going to bring a product to the market that appeals to them, knowing that often, they're not just watching on one screen, they're watching on 2. So it's a core part of our approach as we look to develop and evolve our clubs. And part of that is working, with leagues, with broadcasters to ensure that we are all bringing football into the modern era to nurture, the growth opportunity that we see in the fandom.
And Lindsay, I guess that plays into your work as well, of course, because you have a new type of audience, as you said, a younger one with shorter attention spans and watching multiple screens. So how are you working there to appeal to that fan base as well? So because you have different age groups and genders and so forth, and you need to take all of them into consideration.
Yeah, of course. I think the way that we figure out how to, I guess, tell the story of Mercury 13 in our portfolio of clubs, as we start to, build that out, is something that we are still developing, but equally, I think is really exciting in terms of attracting new audiences and not alienating the ones that already are there. And that's why I started in terms of target audiences with the existing fans of women's football, which there's a lot of men included in that. And we want to ensure that we continue to bring that group along with us as we continue to define what is modern football fandom and what does that look like. I guess the other piece that I'd add is, the women's game is far behind, and as Hannah said, incredibly nascent across the market. And it depends on where you are on the continent, how it looks. But we'll use an example in FC Como Women's. When we bought that team, a lot of the girls were doing their own laundry prior to the matches. And they didn't have enough uniform at their disposal to basically wear for a week and train for a week and then do the laundry. And again, Nike came in as this great partner, as did We Are 8, one of our other founding partners, to essentially help ensure that we could elevate that experience kind of from day zero. So we were able to provide enough kit, basics, right? And that is something that most football teams get, enough kit to then help them ensure that they had clean, fresh jerseys going into training or going into matches. Beyond that, I think one of the ways that we're really looking to evolve that player experience across the portfolio, which speaks to something that we can shout about and some stories that we want to tell to engage fans, is how are we helping those players set themselves up for success after football or beyond the pitch? And we've launched a program in FC Como called Beyond, which is specifically where we bring in, financial experts or experts on reproductive health or experts on how to build a brand. So We Are 8, one of our founding partners, is a social media platform, which is essentially algorithms for good. So there is no algorithm on the platform, and they do a lot with social impact. And the CEO came to Chislago, where our training center is, and essentially gave us a talk to all of the players to help them understand the importance of building their own brand now when they're in the limelight, so that they have that sort of baseline foundation when they do retire, and they can leverage that and parlay that into their own business or, a myriad of other things. And those are just examples of where I think the women's game has a real opportunity to sort of lead the way and how we, tell those stories and showcase those players and some of the amazing things that they're doing, but equally really try to push, I guess, the level of sophistication across the continent in terms of where women's football is and balance that with the reality of what it looks like.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I mean, in post-career is something that every athlete is struggling with, no matter the gender or sport. That, sporting career are shorter. Maybe you retire when you're mid-30s, and then you have more than half of your life hopefully left. And what are you doing with those years? And as you mentioned, like players are brands. How can they leverage that? Or maybe they can go into a different career afterwards.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think this is all super interesting. Something else that I was thinking about is when Hannah, with when we talked about like the criteria for picking a team, and they are like FC Como, for example, they have their like unique style and they have their way, but also Mercury 13 has a strategic idea and what you want with things. So how are you working to keep the authenticity of the club that makes them unique, but still implementing the way of Mercury 13?
That's a great question. I mean, I think we spend a lot of time talking through and thinking through what the Mercury 13 playbook is and how we interact and work with our clubs. I think, every club we look at investing in, we work through a process to understand, okay, how does this align with our portfolio? Like, what is the brand play here? How can we nurture the heritage of this club, but also build a club that's fit for the next 100 years of football? So I think it's really important that each of our clubs have their own identity. They will be in very different markets, have very different fandoms. Some will be potentially in cities, some will be in more remote areas. We don't know as yet, what our full portfolio will look like. But for us, it's very important that each club has its own identity that reflects the ecosystem that it's immediately playing in. but we also seek to have a blueprint such that when you are a fan engaging with our clubs, our players, any touch point with Mercury, you will know it's a Mercury 13 club. I think, we are rooted in getting to a stage where we seek to build a portfolio of league-defining clubs, such that every league in every market that we wish to play in wants to have a Mercury 13 club there, and you will be able to identify it through the way our players interact with our fans, the way you experience our stadium on match day, the way you have access to our merchandise, the way our merchandise looks and feels. The sort of customer journeys, as it were, will be consistent across the board, but every club will have its own unique identity.
That's nice. And I mean, I know that you have talked about sustainable growth model. That's in your vision. So what key elements do you constitutes that sustainable growth for you in women's football?
We touched upon it earlier, that the key, if you look at the traditional football model, it's, you're going for trophies, and that is not necessarily our playbook in terms of how we seek to achieve a sustainable P&L at this juncture. We see the opportunity in commercial growth and unlocking that commercial growth through committing dedicated resource. So if we can evolve and develop a strategy such that we mitigate for the bumps in wage inflation that we see, in the immediate and longer term, I think we're rooted in commercializing our clubs first and then investing on pitch performance. That's the flywheel that we seek to operate. And that is how we believe that we can achieve a sustainable future for our clubs.
So now looking forward, a lot of interesting things happening. Of course, hopefully more clubs to be signed. I mean, that's the goal, right? And that's what you're working on. So looking ahead now for Mercury 13, from both of your angles from different parts in the company, how does the future look like for you and Mercury 13?
Well, I think I'll go first and then Lindsay kind of follow, because I think it's I will find the clubs and then Lindsay will commercialize them. So I think in terms of immediate priorities for me, it's ensuring we have those clubs in our portfolio that meet all the criteria that we've spoken through. And Lindsay?
Yeah, and I think the exciting bit, and Hannah did just mention this, but is, how do we build the football brands for the next 100 years that are modern, that attract that new audience that we discussed, that really have that Mercury 13 layer on top of them, but equally feel really authentic to the communities in which they're based. But there's that red thread through everything where we are the most commercially desirable club in every market that we operate in. And if you're a fan coming to any of our stadiums, meeting any of our players, engaging with any of our content, it's Mercury 13 and it's one of our clubs, because there is that elevated lifestyle lean that you experience.
It's exciting times ahead for sure.
Yeah.
If we leave Mercury 13 for a second, I'm interested in a little bit about your careers. And there are a lot of young people listening, maybe women who wants to work in sports or maybe in football, women's football particularly. So what are some advice that you have for someone? I mean, you have worked in sports and in general. We mentioned like McLaren, esports, law, like we have a lot of experience here. So what are some advice you would give a young person or maybe a young woman in particular who wants to work in the sports industry?
I love this question because I'm really passionate about people. At the end of the day, anyone in business is working with people, and you're influencing the people around your table, and your team, maybe clients, maybe, partners, whatever that looks like. There's just a person behind every brand and every business that you have to figure out how to work with. I'm a big believer in, I guess, 3 principles when I'm looking at hiring somebody, and then I'll get to the advice. And I guess the first is, relentless accountability. So really owning your role, no matter what level, in that long-term vision and purpose of that business. And if you're unclear on it, say something, ask your line manager, ask the team to understand. I appreciate, maybe you're just doing a guest list for an event, but that might be an event that's positioning your business for something really critical in the future. So I think everyone's sort of accountability and ownership of that's important. The second one is being really resourceful. So women's football in particular requires, I think, a different way of thinking about how you build the product, the audience, the campaigns. And no one has the right playbook yet, which I think is the opportunity that you're starting to see, a lot of Angel City, Arsenal, Barca really step up how they're delivering that product. But there's bumps in the road for all of them, and there's always ways to iterate and to evolve. So what can we figure out? How can we be resourceful? And how can you, as a young talent coming into the industry, be resourceful to sort of prove out your value and help those businesses come up with those plans? And then the last one is, and I say this all the time, but no blame culture. So really, and this maybe goes back to accountability, but really looking at everything kind of at yourself and your role in it first before, I guess, blaming somebody else or looking across somebody else. And that goes hand in hand with like taking risks and bold decisions. And all of that to say, my biggest piece of advice, I guess, is, your first job, your maybe first two jobs, no one can make a mistake. So you'll learn something from all of those experiences. And that knowledge is power. So even if you learn, like I did, when I started out in ticket sales at the Dallas Cowboys, almost 20 years ago, I don't love selling tickets. I knew very quickly that was not my path long term, but it taught me how to speak to decision makers. It taught me how to close partnerships or close conversations and ask for a contract and not be scared of that. So it taught me a lot and taught me that I didn't want to do ticket sales forever. So that, you learn a lot from every experience.
Yeah, and I mean, just before Hannah goes, ticket sales is part of revenue, and now you work with revenue. So, I mean, that experience, of course, adds to what you're doing now.
Absolutely. Exactly.
Yeah, I'd agree with everything Lindsay said. I think kind of the two things that spring to mind whenever I speak to people who want to get involved in the sports industry is, shoot your shot, like meet as many people as you can, have as many conversations. Even if you're from a more sort of traditional corporate background, there are so many roles and functions opening up around the industry at the moment that there is always a capability to be involved if you can find an area that aligns well with your skill set. Effectively, we're all trying to run brilliant businesses at the end of the day. So shoot your shot, meet as many people, network. It's a small industry. Go to spaces where you can find like-minded people and explore every opportunity that you can. And I think the second piece I'd say is aligned to what Lindsay said is if you are new to the industry, and it's something that we kind of think through and apply day to day at Mercury, is kind of fail fast, learn faster. So, if it's a new role, if it's a new industry, as Lindsay says, you will make mistakes, but learn from those mistakes and grow, and the business will benefit from it. So I think the sports industry is at a really exciting time. The movement that we're involved in women's sport, is a privilege for us day to day. I think, 13 years ago when I was at the Football Association, had I thought I would be where I am today? No, we don't take that for granted. And the opportunity for people to have a meaningful role in this industry as it relates to the growth of women's sport is broadening daily. So if you're interested and you are talented and you are resourceful and you can hustle, shoot your shot, and don't be afraid to fail fast because you'll learn faster.
I love that. That's some great advice, and also with the hireability, then applying for a job. So some good tips there as well. I love that. Before we sign off here, is there something I haven't asked you yet? Something you want to mention about Mercury 13, your vision? Something that I haven't mentioned?
No, the only thing I'd add is, and I guess this goes back to sort of that purpose-led angle that we talked about at the top of the conversation, is, what we're trying to do at the end of the day is really use football, women's football specifically, as a bit of a catalyst for societal change. Mm-hmm. And I think Mercury 13, we're called that because 13 women in the 60s in the US basically tried to create an astronaut team and go to the moon. And the project was canceled immediately by NASA because they were women, solely on their gender. And actually, we believe if they would have made it to the moon, it would have been a very different, landscape across the world with women equality more broadly. And so we're very much bringing the spirit of those 13 women and an homage to them, trying to use football as this vehicle for broader change. And that's the purpose. So it's really authentic. As Hannah said, it's really a privilege to be part of it. And genuinely, I think we all come to the office to work and to our conversations and partners just so enthusiastic about the potential, the opportunity, and what we're trying to do. And that's a blessing. And everyone should try to work in a place where they feel like is a privilege.
Yeah, I love that. And I love Mercury 13 and its vision. I've had several speakers from your great company on here, and it's as fascinating every time. Lindsay and Hannah, thank you so much for taking the time to jump on Sports Management Podcast.
Thanks, Marcus.